Let's get to the role of the credit rating agencies. It's been in the spotlight recently, highlighted by yesterday's Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission hearing. Joining us right now on the Squawk Newsline is famed hedge fund investor David Einhorn of Greenlight Capital. The fund has about $6.8 billion under management. And full disclosure, Greenlight Capital is short both Moody's and S&P. But David, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Hey, good morning, guys.
It's great to talk to you. And the call that you're making on Moody's and S&P, which we found out about a week ago, is really, really interesting because you tend to make the calls that are very timely and right in the news. You called Lehman very early on. What is it that you see in this business model that makes you think that these should be short right now?
Yeah, I actually think this is something we've been at for some time, and it'll probably take a good long time further for it to work out completely. But the basic problem with the two stocks, and actually it's not Standard & Poor's, it's McGraw-Hill, which is the parent.
The parent company of S&P,
yeah.
Right. Hey, David, I'm sorry to ask you this. Are you on a speakerphone right now?
I am. I'm about as close as I can.
Can you pick up the phone maybe just to make sure that we can hear you, because we're getting a bit of an echo back on the news line?
I'm sorry. It's not attached.
Oh, it's not? Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Sure. I'm sorry about the feedback as well. The basic problems are that, first of all, I think that the brands are ruined based upon what they've done over the last number of years. Second, I think they're facing ongoing problems from a legislative perspective. The Congress is changing the rules, which is going to have some impact on the revenue model. Just yesterday, Europe announced that they're setting up an agency basically, I think, to get rid of the U.S. rating oligopoly, and I think that'll have a bad effect on their revenues in Europe going forward. And then ultimately, they have a problem with their legal liability relating to sort of a variety of lawsuits that have been filed under a variety of theories. And the problem that the rating agencies have is, first of all, I think there's a lot of merit to a lot of the suits. And second, they really have to win every single one in order for their equity shareholders to come out okay at the end of this. I think it'll take some time, but I think the odds of them running the table on the litigation are very low.
Yes, this was kind of highlighted yesterday by the hearings, the FCIC hearings. But I guess the question becomes, you've written extensively about what needs to happen next. You've talked about what needs to happen next. There are a lot of proposals out there, but do the ratings agencies serve any good to investors who maybe don't have time to do the research themselves? You don't rely on ratings agencies. Warren Buffett, even though he is invested in Moody's, doesn't rely on them either. But what about the average investor who may not be able to spend that kind of time looking into the books?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't think that there's a public good to them. I think they're basically a public bad. And the truth actually is the people who say that they don't rely on ratings, they actually use them a great deal. They use them to identify misrated securities so that they can take advantage of more passive market participants.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, they like to figure out what the rating agencies are going to do, and they like to front run against them. They like to figure out what other market participants have to do when rating agencies downgrade things, and they're there to buy from forced and mechanical sellers. So really, it's the active managers that say that they don't use ratings that actually benefit the most by them. And it's the passive holders, many of the large pension funds, which are sort of forced to use the ratings, that effectively are having their pockets picked through this process.
The Barney Frank proposal in Congress would just stop making the pension funds use these ratings. Is that enough to not force some of these big holdings to go ahead and use these ratings?
Well, if that was the whole problem with the ratings, I mean, the market could kind of figure itself out. The bigger problem with the ratings is the problem that the rating agencies have over the issuers. They have enormous problems in terms of control, having centralized rating committees deciding whether or not you're creditworthy or not. It's much better when you face financial distress to be able to go out to the market, talk to lots of different potential investors, and see if they will lend you money. It's sort of like having all of your business tied up with Walmart. You know, you become very dependent on Walmart. If your credit is depending on, a rating committee at Standard & Poor's, you really don't need them pronouncing you not creditworthy at a time when, you've reached some kind of a stress. But they actually are, they're very pro-cyclical. While things are good, they tell everybody that things are fine, even as risks are sort of building. And then when you have a real problem, they're sort of there to accelerate the problem by putting out an untimely downgrade. And many companies have seen that happen, and I'm fearful that eventually many governments are going to see that happen.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll get back to that in one moment. But back to the ratings agencies and what went wrong. Do you think what happened was a case where they were intentionally misleading people, or do you think it's just a case of being inept and not being able to really understand the complicated financial situations?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the emails that have come out at the hearing yesterday is that the rating agencies had a very, very large focus on market share. And one of the lawsuits, I think the Connecticut lawsuit, basically said the rating agencies' official policies is to be objective and to not let their business interests get in the way with their ratings. But it appears that in the most recent cycle, that's exactly what did happen.
And I guess that goes into your theory of what will come out in these lawsuits and what won't?
Well, that's one of the theories, but there's really a bunch of different ways to sort of get at these guys.
Mm-hmm. Also, you mentioned you fear that there is a downgrade coming for whether it be nations, whether it be states, whether it be municipalities. That was something that was raised in the hearings yesterday. Warren Buffett was asked whether he thought you could measure some of these situations. He said, look, it depends entirely on whether the federal government will stand behind the states and the municipalities. If that's the case, I would give them one rating. If not, I would give them a different rating. I guess that's the wild card. What happens to either in the United States what the federal government does or in Europe what the ECB does?
Sure. Look, I mean, a lot of the governments have pretty severe fiscal problems. And one of the ways I'm worried about how a crisis could develop would be if rating agencies are there saying that everything is fine, despite building fiscal irresponsibility. And then eventually, once the market begins to lose confidence, then the rating agencies pile on with an untimely downgrade, which then really sort of accelerates things. I think we just saw that sort of happen in Greece over the last couple months.
David, just in terms of the ratings agencies, have you spoken with either the FCIC or any of the congressional committees that have been looking into trying to figure out solutions, ways to change financial regulation?
Yeah, I have spoken with some people in the Congress. I've not spoken with the FCIC.
Okay, and so they know about your ideas, what you've proposed and put forth. What was their reaction?
Well, the basic is that the banks and the big bond buyers want to continue with the ratings. Mm-hmm. And so they seem, through their political influence, to have won the day. And Congress gets told, well, if you don't have the ratings, then we're going to take our ball and go home, and no one's going to be able to issue credit.
Right.
And I think that's exactly the kind of bluff the Congress should call them on. I mean, if we didn't have ratings, it's not like Morgan Stanley and Bank of America would stop issuing bonds, and it's not that bond buyers would stop buying bonds. It's just we'd have to come up with a different process by which that happens. The rating agencies themselves basically threaten and say, well, if we don't have these ratings, then no one's going to know what to do. But first of all, that might not be a bad thing. Second of all, if the rating agencies were sort of downgraded to boutiques and people who wanted to use them purchase the research, it would mean that they would have to do research that was good enough that people would want to have to pay for it. And that would be a net improvement to the overall system.
What about
not only that, they might give the ratings away for free anyway. I mean, right now, Wall Street banks, when they downgrade and upgrade stocks, they give that away, not the research, but the upgrade and the downgrade. You guys report on that all the time.
Right.
There's a good chance that the rating agencies would decide for business reasons and to maintain relevance that they'd probably wind up giving away the ratings anyway.
What about Senator Franken's proposal to have some sort of a government oversight committee that says, okay, we're going to tell you which rating agency rates you? Does that make the situation better or worse?
Well, it does eliminate one conflict of having the issuers choosing their own raters and therefore having an opportunity to pick the guy who's going to give you the easiest grade. But it doesn't address the basic structural problems of having centralized ratings.
All right. David, we want to thank you very much for joining us today and laying out your case. Really appreciate your time today.